The morning started like any other Tuesday for David. He woke up at 5:30, made himself a quick cup of coffee, and headed out the door while most of the city was still asleep. The November air was cold enough to see his breath, and he pulled his jacket tighter as he walked to the bus stop. David had been working as a security guard at Riverside Shopping Mall for almost 3 years now. It wasn't the dream job he'd imagined when he was younger, but it paid the bills. More importantly, it helped him support his younger sister through nursing school. Their parents had passed away in an accident 2 years ago, and since then, taking care of his sister had become his top priority. He arrived at the mall 30 minutes before his shift started, like he always did. Some of his coworkers thought he was crazy for showing up early without getting paid for it, but David believed in doing things right. He liked walking through the empty corridors before the stores opened, checking that everything was in order. It gave him a sense of purpose that went beyond just wearing a uniform and watching security cameras. That morning, as he unlocked the main entrance doors, he noticed the sky was heavy with gray clouds. It looked like rain was coming, maybe even snow. He made a mental note to put out the wet floor signs near the entrances once the weather turned bad. Small details like that mattered to him, even if nobody else noticed. His supervisor, Mr. Chen, arrived a few minutes later and nodded at him with approval. "Always here early, David. I wish I had 10 more like you." David smiled and shrugged. "Just doing my job, sir." The mall opened at 9, and soon the usual morning crowd started trickling in. Retired folks doing their morning walks, parents with strollers, a few teenagers skipping school. David knew most of the regular faces by now. He'd help Mrs. Patterson with her shopping bags, remind the teenagers not to skateboard inside, and keep an eye out for anything unusual. Around 10:30, something caught his attention near the main entrance. An elderly man was struggling with the heavy glass doors. He looked to be in his late 70s, maybe early 80s. He wore an old tweed coat that had seen better days, and he was carrying a small leather briefcase that seemed too heavy for his frail arms. David watched as the old man tried to push the door open with his shoulder while holding the briefcase. The door was heavy, designed to close automatically, and the man was clearly having trouble. Several people walked past him, too busy with their phones or their own thoughts to notice or care. Without thinking twice, David left his post and hurried over. "Sir, let me help you with that," he said, reaching for the door. Just as he got there, the old man lost his grip on the briefcase. It fell to the ground with a thud, and papers scattered everywhere. Photographs, documents, and what looked like official letters spread across the entrance floor. The wind from outside caught a few of them, sending them skittering across the tiles. Oh no," the old man muttered, looking distressed and confused. He bent down slowly, his hand shaking as he reached for the papers. "Please, sir, let me get those for you," David said gently. He quickly gathered up the scattered papers, chasing down the ones that had blown farther away. As he picked them up, he couldn't help but notice they were old photographs of a young couple, some legal documents with official-looking seals, and letters addressed to someone named Arthur Whitmore. He carefully organized the papers and handed them back to the old man, who had managed to sit down on a nearby bench. The man's face was pale and his breathing seemed a bit labored. "Are you okay, sir?"
Can I get you some water?
David asked, genuinely concerned. The old man looked up at him with watery blue eyes. "Thank you, young man. I'm just a bit tired, and confused, to be honest. I'm looking for a law office. Henderson and Associates. They used to be on the second floor, but I can't seem to find them." David's heart sank a little. He knew exactly which office the man was talking about. "Sir, I'm sorry to tell you this, but that law firm moved out about 5 years ago. They relocated to the business district across town." The old man's face fell. 5 years? "But I was just here. Well, maybe it wasn't just recently." He looked down at his briefcase, seeming lost and disoriented. David glanced at his watch, then at the old man's confused expression. He made a decision that would change his life, though he didn't know it at the time. He pulled out his radio and called his supervisor. "Mr. Chen, this is David. I need to take my morning break now, if that's okay." Something came up. There was a brief pause. "Sure, David. Everything all right?"
"Yes, sir."
"Just helping someone out." David turned to the old man. "Sir, I'm on my break now. How about I help you find that law office? Do you have the address?" The old man looked surprised, then grateful. "You would do that? But surely you have better things to do than help an old fool who can't even remember when he last visited a place." "It's no trouble at all," David said with a warm smile. Besides, I can't let you wander around town on a cold day like this. Let's get you to where you need to be." He helped the old man to his feet and supported him as they walked outside. David flagged down a taxi and helped the man inside before sliding in next to him. As the driver pulled away from the mall, David gave him the address of the business district where most law firms had relocated. During the ride, the old man seemed to relax a bit. "I'm Arthur, by the way. Arthur Whitmore." "I'm David. Nice to meet you, Mr. Whitmore." "Please, call me Arthur." The old man studied David's face for a moment. "You're very kind helping a stranger like this. Most people these days, they just walk right past. I stood at that door for almost 10 minutes before you came along." David felt a pang of sadness hearing that. "Well, that's not right. Everyone deserves a little help sometimes." As they drove through the city streets, David noticed Arthur clutching his briefcase tightly, as if it contained something precious. The old man stared out the window, lost in thought, and David wondered what urgent business had brought him out on such a cold morning. Little did David know that this simple act of kindness, this decision to help a struggling old man with a heavy door, was about to set in motion a series of events that would transform his entire life. Sometimes the smallest gestures create the biggest ripples, and this was one of those moments. The taxi rolled on through the city, carrying two strangers who would soon become something more. And in David's pocket, his phone buzzed with a text from his sister asking if he could help her with rent this month. He sighed quietly, knowing his paycheck was already stretched thin, and turned his attention back to Arthur, glad that at least today he could help someone who needed it. The taxi weaved through the morning traffic and Arthur began to talk. At first it was just small comments about the weather and how the city had changed over the years, but gradually his words became more personal, more meaningful. "I used to drive through these streets every day," Arthur said, his voice carrying a hint of nostalgia. "Back when I worked as a mechanical engineer. That was 40 years ago now. Hard to believe how fast time passes." David listened attentively. He'd always been a good listener, something his mother had taught him before she passed. "What kind of engineering did you do?" Arthur's eyes brightened a bit. "Industrial machinery, mostly. I worked on components for manufacturing equipment. Even got a few patents back in the 70s. Nothing fancy, but they were mine, you know? My contribution to the world." "That sounds amazing," David said, and he meant it. "Did you enjoy it?" "I loved it," Arthur replied. "Spent most of my life in workshops and drawing boards. My wife Martha used to joke that I was married to my work before I was married to her." His smile faded slightly. "She passed away 3 years ago. Cancer." "I'm sorry to hear that," David said softly. Arthur nodded, his fingers tracing the worn leather of his briefcase. "We never had children. It was just the two of us for 52 years. Now it's just me." He paused, looking out the window. "That's the hardest part, you know. The silence. The empty house. Nobody to share breakfast with or tell about your day." David felt a lump in his throat. He understood loneliness, though in a different way. After his parents died, the apartment felt too quiet sometimes, especially when his sister was at her nursing classes or working her part-time job at the hospital. "I live with my younger sister," David found himself sharing. "Our parents passed away 2 years ago in a car accident. It's just the two of us now." Arthur turned to look at him, really look at him. "I'm very sorry, son. That must be incredibly hard. You're young to be carrying such responsibility." David shrugged. Someone had to step up. "She's in nursing school now, almost done with her 2nd year. I'm proud of her. She works hard, takes her studies seriously. Our parents would have been proud too." "And what about you?" Arthur asked. "What are your dreams? Surely you don't plan to be a security guard forever." The question caught David off guard. Nobody had asked him about his dreams in a long time. He'd been so focused on surviving, on making sure the bills were paid and his sister had what she needed, that he'd almost forgotten he was allowed to have dreams. "I don't know," David said honestly. "I guess I've always wanted to do something that matters, something that helps people, especially kids. When I was younger, before everything happened, I used to volunteer at a community center in our neighborhood. Helped kids with homework, coached basketball, that sort of thing." "And?" Arthur prompted. "And I always thought maybe one day I could open a place like that. A real community center where kids from rough neighborhoods could come and just be safe, learn things, play sports, get help with school. A place where they'd have people who believed in them." David laughed a little, feeling embarrassed. It's silly, I know. Those places cost money I'll never have. Arthur was quiet for a moment, but there was something in his expression that David couldn't quite read. It's not silly at all, the old man said firmly. The world needs more people who think like you do. People who care about others. The taxi pulled up in front of a modern office building. David paid the fare, waving off Arthur's protests, and helped the old man out of the car. They walked into the lobby together, and David made sure Arthur found the right office on the building directory. Henderson and Associates, 4th floor, David said, pointing to the elevator. Do you want me to come up with you? Make sure you get there okay? You've already done so much, Arthur said. But there was hope in his voice that suggested he didn't want to be alone just yet. It's no problem, David assured him. I've still got 20 minutes left on my break. They rode the elevator up, and David walked Arthur right to the reception desk. The secretary looked up with a professional smile. I have an appointment, Arthur said, his voice suddenly shaky again. Arthur Whitmore. I'm here to see Mr. Henderson about my estate papers. The secretary checked her computer and nodded. Yes, Mr. Whitmore. You can have a seat and someone will be with you shortly. David helped Arthur to a comfortable chair in the waiting area. You're all set, he said. Will you be okay from here? Arthur reached into his coat pocket and pulled out an old business card holder. His hands trembled slightly as he opened it. David, would you mind giving me your phone number? I might need help with a few more errands in the coming weeks. I hate to impose, but I don't have anyone else to ask, and you've been so kind. David hesitated for just a second, not because he didn't want to help, but because his life was already stretched so thin. But looking at Arthur's hopeful face, he couldn't say no. He wrote his number on a piece of paper and handed it to the old man. Call me any time, David said. If I can help, I will. Arthur took the paper and carefully placed it in his wallet. Thank you, David. You have no idea what this means to me. Most people wouldn't have stopped to help an old man with a door, let alone spend their break time making sure he got where he needed to go. Anyone would have done the same. David said, though they both knew that wasn't true. No, Arthur said quietly. No, they wouldn't have. I stood at that door for 10 minutes this morning, watching people walk past me like I was invisible. You're different. You see people. David felt touched by the words, but also a bit uncomfortable with the praise. Take care of yourself, Mr. Whitmore. Arthur, I mean. As David rode the elevator back down and caught another taxi to the mall, he thought about their conversation. There was something about Arthur that reminded him of his own grandfather, who had passed when David was just a teenager. The same gentle wisdom, the same loneliness that came from outliving everyone you loved. When David got back to work, Mr. Chen asked if everything was all right. David nodded and said he'd just helped someone find their way. It seemed like such a small thing, hardly worth mentioning. Just another Tuesday morning, another small kindness in a world that often felt too harsh and rushed. But what David didn't know, couldn't have known, was that Arthur had been watching him carefully during their entire time together. The old man had noticed how David paid for the taxi without hesitation, even though his wallet was thin. He'd heard the worry in David's voice when he talked about his sister's expenses. He'd seen the way David's face lit up when he talked about helping kids at the community center, and Arthur had made a decision. But that decision would remain his secret for now, tucked away like the papers in his worn briefcase, waiting for the right moment to be revealed. David returned to his post, checked his phone to see another message from his sister asking about groceries, and went back to his routine. He had no idea that his life had just taken a turn toward something extraordinary. Sometimes destiny arrives quietly, disguised as an ordinary Tuesday morning. 3 days later, David's phone rang during his lunch break. He didn't recognize the number, but something told him to answer it. Hello? David? It's Arthur. Arthur Whitmore. From the mall, remember? Of course I remember, David said, genuinely pleased to hear from him. How are you doing? Did your appointment go well? Yes, it went fine. Listen, I know this is short notice, but I was wondering if you might be free this Saturday. I need to run a few errands, and I'd feel much better having someone with me. I can pay you for your time. You don't need to pay me, David said quickly. Saturday works. What time? They arranged to meet at 10 in the morning, and Arthur gave him his address. It was in an older part of the city, a neighborhood David didn't visit often. When Saturday came, he took the bus there and found himself standing in front of a modest house with a small garden that had seen better days. Arthur answered the door with a warm smile. Right on time. Come in, come in. The house was neat but clearly belonged to someone who lived alone. There were photographs everywhere, mostly of Arthur and a woman David assumed was Martha. The furniture was old but well maintained, and everything had that particular stillness that comes from a quiet life. I just need to grab a few things from the attic, Arthur explained. My knees aren't what they used to be, and climbing that ladder is getting dangerous. Would you mind helping me bring down some boxes? Not at all, David said. They spent the next hour going through boxes in Arthur's attic. Most contained old paperwork, engineering blueprints, and more photographs. As they worked, Arthur told stories about his life. He talked about Martha, about how they'd met at a dance in 1958, how she'd supported his dreams even when money was tight. She was the smart one, Arthur said, carefully dusting off a photo album. I was good with machines, but Martha, she understood people. She always said I got so focused on my work that I forgot to look up and see the world around me. David helped carry the boxes downstairs, and they took a break with coffee that Arthur insisted on making. It was terrible coffee, bitter and weak at the same time, but David drank it without complaint. Can I ask you something? Arthur said, settling into his worn armchair. That community center you mentioned. Tell me more about that dream of yours. David felt embarrassed bringing it up again, but Arthur seemed genuinely interested. It's not really a plan or anything. Just something I think about sometimes. A place where kids from neighborhoods like where I grew up could go after school. Somewhere safe, with people who care about them. What would you offer there? Arthur asked. David found himself talking more than he'd intended. He described tutoring programs, sports activities, maybe even workshops where kids could learn practical skills. A place with computers and books, somewhere they could just be kids without worrying about the troubles waiting outside. Too many kids fall through the cracks, David said. They're not bad kids. They just need someone to believe in them, to show them there's another path. I see teenagers at the mall sometimes, and I can tell they're heading down the wrong road. I try to talk to them, but I'm just a security guard. They don't really listen. Arthur was quiet for a long moment, his fingers steepled together thoughtfully. You know what I learned too late in life, David? That we accumulate things, money, success, achievements, but none of it means anything if you're sitting alone at the end. Martha and I, we were happy, but I worked too much. I put off things we wanted to do, always saying there'd be time later. And then suddenly there wasn't. The conversation grew deeper as the morning turned to afternoon. Arthur shared regrets and wisdom earned through decades of living. David listened, feeling like he was receiving advice from the grandfather he'd lost years ago. Over the next few weeks, these visits became a regular thing. Arthur would call, always with some small errand that needed doing, and David would come over on his days off. They'd sort through old papers, fix things around the house, or sometimes just sit and talk. David began to realize that Arthur didn't really need help with errands. He needed company, someone to talk to, a connection to the world outside his lonely house. And David needed it too, though he didn't realize it at first. His life had become so focused on work and responsibility that he'd forgotten what it felt like to simply enjoy someone's company. Arthur never asked for anything more than David could give. He never made him feel guilty about the time or treated him like hired help. They were becoming friends despite the decades between them. One afternoon in late January, David brought his sister along. Her name was Kelly, and she was between classes. Arthur lit up when he met her, asking about her nursing studies and listening with genuine interest as she talked about her dream of working in pediatrics. Your brother speaks very highly of you, Arthur told her. He's very proud, though I don't think he tells you that enough. Kelly glanced at David with surprise. He doesn't talk about feelings much. Never has. That's because he's too busy taking care of everyone else, Arthur said wisely. I've learned that about him these past months. He's got a good heart, your brother. After Kelly left to get to her evening class, Arthur became more serious. David, I want you to promise me something. What's that? Promise me you won't let life pass you by. Don't make my mistakes. Don't work so hard for everyone else that you forget to live for yourself, too. David nodded, not quite understanding the weight Arthur was placing on this promise. I promise. And promise me you'll never lose that kindness of yours. Never become cynical or hard no matter what happens. The world needs people like you. I promise, David said again, wondering why Arthur suddenly seemed so intense about this. Arthur relaxed then, settling back into his chair. Good. That's good. In early February, Arthur called sounding different, his voice weaker. David, I'm not feeling well. I'm at City General Hospital. You don't have to come, but I wanted you to know. David left work immediately, not caring that he'd have to make up the hours later. He found Arthur in a hospital bed, looking smaller and frailer than he'd ever seen him. The diagnosis wasn't good. His heart was failing, had been failing for years, and there wasn't much the doctors could do at his age. I knew it was coming, Arthur said calmly. I'm 83. I've had a good run. David visited every day after work, sometimes just sitting quietly while Arthur slept. He brought books to read aloud, knowing Arthur enjoyed listening even when he was too tired to talk. Other hospital visitors would come and go, but David was the only consistent presence. The nurses noticed. One of them pulled David aside one evening. Are you his grandson? No, David said. Just a friend. Well, you're a good friend, she said. Not many people would show up like this for someone who isn't family. But the truth was, somewhere along the way, Arthur had become family. Not by blood, but by choice and connection. And as David sat beside the old man's hospital bed, holding his frail hand and listening to the steady beep of monitors, he had no idea that Arthur had already set in motion something that would change his life forever. The old man had secrets, plans that he'd made with careful consideration. And soon those plans would be revealed in ways David could never have imagined. Arthur passed away on a quiet Thursday morning in early March. David had visited him the night before, and they'd talked about simple things. The weather. A funny story about a confused shopper at the mall. Nothing heavy or sad. Arthur had smiled, squeezed David's hand, and said, "Thank you for everything, my friend." Those were the last words they shared. The hospital called David at work the next morning. He stood in the mall corridor, phone pressed to his ear, and felt something break inside him. He'd known this was coming, but knowing didn't make it hurt any less. In just a few months, Arthur had become one of the most important people in his life. The funeral was small. David was surprised by how few people attended. There was the lawyer, Mr. Henderson, a couple of elderly neighbors who barely knew Arthur, and a woman who'd worked with him decades ago. That was it. David sat in the front row of the funeral home, feeling the weight of how alone Arthur had been in the world. He gave a short eulogy, his voice cracking as he talked about Arthur's kindness, his wisdom, and how much their friendship had meant to him. When he finished, he noticed Mr. Henderson watching him with an odd expression, like he knew something David didn't. After the service, David went back to work and tried to fall into his normal routine. But everything felt different now. The mall seemed louder, more chaotic. He kept thinking about Arthur sitting alone in that house. All those photographs of a life that had once been full but had slowly emptied out. 2 weeks passed. David threw himself into work, picking up extra shifts to avoid thinking too much. His sister Kelly noticed he was quieter than usual, but gave him space to grieve. Then the letter came. It was a certified letter, requiring his signature. The return address was Henderson and Associates. David's hands trembled slightly as he opened it. Inside was a formal request for him to come to their office at his earliest convenience regarding the estate of Arthur Whitmore. David's first thought was that maybe Arthur had left him something small. A book, perhaps, or one of those old photographs. He called the number on the letter and scheduled an appointment for his next day off. When Saturday came, David put on his one good shirt and took the bus to the business district. He remembered the last time he'd been to this building, helping Arthur find his way. It felt like a lifetime ago, though it had only been 4 months. The receptionist recognized him and smiled warmly. "Mr. Henderson is expecting you. Go right in." David walked into the office and Mr. Henderson stood up to shake his hand. There was another woman there too, a paralegal named Christine who carried a thick folder. "David, thank you for coming," Mr. Henderson said. "Please sit down." David sat, feeling nervous without knowing why. Mr. Henderson had a serious expression, but there was something else there too. Something that looked almost like respect. "David, I'm going to be direct with you because that's what Arthur would have wanted," Mr. Henderson began. "Arthur Whitmore revised his will shortly after he met you last November. He came to my office several times over the following months, making adjustments and ensuring everything was exactly as he wanted it." David nodded, not understanding where this was going. Arthur had no children, no close relatives. His estate needed to go somewhere, and he thought very carefully about his choice. Mr. Henderson paused. David, Arthur has left the bulk of his estate to you. The words didn't make sense at first. David heard them, but they seemed to bounce off his brain without sticking. I'm sorry, what? Christine opened the folder and pulled out several documents. Mr. Whitmore's estate includes his house, several investment accounts, and ongoing royalty payments from patents he held. The total value is approximately $2.3 million. All of it goes to you. David felt like the floor had disappeared beneath him. That's impossible. There must be a mistake. I barely knew him. We were just friends. There's no mistake, Mr. Henderson said gently. Arthur was very clear about his intentions. He was, in fact, more thorough than most clients I've worked with. He wanted to make absolutely certain this would hold up to any legal challenge, though he didn't expect any. Christine handed David an envelope. He also left this for you. He wrote it about a week before he passed. David took the envelope with shaking hands. His name was written on the front in Arthur's unsteady handwriting. He opened it carefully and began to read. Dear David, the letter began. If you're reading this, then I'm gone, and you're probably sitting in Henderson's office feeling confused and maybe even guilty. Don't be. Let me explain everything. That first day at the mall, I wasn't as confused as I seemed. I knew that law office had moved. I was testing something, testing people, really. I'd spent the previous 6 months watching people ignore me, walk past me, treat me like I was invisible. I'm old, I move slowly, and in today's world, that makes you easy to overlook. But you didn't overlook me. You stopped. You helped. You gave up your break time and your own money to make sure a stranger got where he needed to go. You didn't know who I was or what I had. You helped because it was the right thing to do. Over the months that followed, I watched you carefully. I saw how you worked 2 jobs to support your sister. I saw your kindness to everyone you met. I heard about your dream of helping kids who need it. And I saw a young man who was giving everything to everyone else without keeping anything for himself. David, I made mistakes in my life. I focused too much on work, on building wealth, and not enough on building connections. Martha and I were happy, but we were alone. We had money, but no one to share it with. I don't want to see you make the same mistake. This money is not a reward. It's a tool. Use it to build the life I didn't. Use it to make that dream of yours real. Open that community center. Help those kids, but also take care of yourself and your sister. Live your life, not just survive it. You gave me something in my final months that money couldn't buy. You gave me friendship, dignity, and companionship. You made me feel seen again. That's worth more than any amount I'm leaving you. Don't feel guilty about this. You didn't befriend me for money. You didn't even know I had any. You befriended me because that's who you are. You're a good man, David, and good men are rare. Promise me you'll use this to build something beautiful. Promise me you'll help those kids. And promise me you'll remember that kindness matters even when no one is watching, even when there's no reward. Thank you for being my friend. Thank you for those last few months of not being alone. Your friend, Arthur. David read the letter 3 times, tears streaming down his face. Mr. Henderson quietly handed him a box of tissues and waited. I don't deserve this, David finally said, his voice barely a whisper. Arthur clearly believed you did, Mr. Henderson replied. And from what I observed, from the way you showed up at his funeral, from how the hospital staff spoke about you, I think he was right. Christine began explaining the practical details. The house would need to be transferred into his name. The investment accounts would take a few weeks to process. There were tax implications to consider. David heard the words but couldn't quite process them. He walked out of that office in a daze, the letter clutched in his hand. His entire world turned upside down. He stood on the sidewalk, people rushing past him on their way to wherever they needed to be, and realized that his life had just changed forever because he'd stopped to help an old man with a heavy door. Sometimes kindness comes back to you in ways you never expect. David didn't tell anyone right away. He went home, sat on his couch, and stared at the wall for hours. His sister Kelly came home from her shift at the hospital and found him there, still in his good shirt, Arthur's letter on the coffee table beside him. David, are you okay? You're scaring me. He looked at her and the words finally came out. Arthur left me everything. His house. His money, everything. Kelly sat down slowly beside him. What do you mean, everything? Over $2 million. The number still didn't sound real when he said it out loud. He left it all to me because I helped him with a door. Because I was his friend. They sat together in silence, both trying to process what this meant. Kelly was the first to speak. "What are you going to do?" "I don't know," David admitted. "Part of me feels like I should give it back. But there's no one to give it back to. And Arthur wanted me to have it. He wrote me a letter explaining everything." Over the next few days, David struggled with guilt. He hadn't helped Arthur expecting anything in return. He'd done it because it was the right thing to do. And now he felt like accepting the money somehow tainted that pure intention. He kept going to work at the mall, kept living his normal life while the paperwork slowly processed in lawyers' offices downtown. Kelly finally sat him down one evening. "David, listen to me. You didn't know Arthur had money. You were his friend when he had nothing to offer you but conversation and terrible coffee. This isn't about what you deserve or don't deserve. This is about a lonely old man who wanted his life's work to mean something after he was gone. By refusing his gift, you'd be disrespecting his wishes." Her words made sense, but it still took time for David to accept them. He talked to Mr. Henderson, who helped him understand the responsibility that came with this kind of inheritance. They discussed investments, taxes, and long-term planning. David had never thought about money beyond making sure bills got paid on time. The first thing David did was pay off Kelly's nursing school debt. She cried when he told her, insisting it was too much, but he wouldn't hear it. "Arthur wanted me to take care of the people I love," he said. "You're working yourself to death between school and that hospital job. Let me do this." With Kelly's education secured, David turned his attention to Arthur's letter and the dream they'd talked about so many times, the community center. He spent weeks researching, talking to people who ran similar programs, learning what worked and what didn't. He found a building in the neighborhood where he'd grown up, a place that had once been a recreation center but had closed down years ago due to budget cuts. The building needed work, but it had good bones. Large rooms for activities, a gym with basketball hoops that just needed new nets, space for computers and study areas. David could see it all in his mind, exactly as he'd described it to Arthur on those quiet Saturday afternoons. He bought the building and began renovations. He hired contractors, but he also worked alongside them on his days off, painting walls and installing equipment. He wanted to be part of building this dream, not just paying for it. 18 months after Arthur's death, the Whitmore Community Center opened its doors. David had left his job at the mall to run it full-time. The center offered after-school programs, tutoring, sports leagues, and mentorship opportunities. It was everything he'd imagined and more. On opening day, David stood in the lobby and looked at the framed photograph on the wall. It was one of the pictures from Arthur's house showing Arthur and Martha from years ago, both smiling at the camera. Beneath it was a plaque that read, "In memory of Arthur and Martha Whitmore." Because kindness matters, the center filled up quickly. Kids from the neighborhood came after school, some for help with homework, others just looking for a safe place to be. David hired staff who shared his vision, people who genuinely cared about making a difference. He created the Martha and Arthur Whitmore Scholarship Fund for students pursuing careers in engineering, nursing, and community service. One afternoon, about 2 years after the center opened, David was helping a teenager named Ramon with his math homework. Ramon had been getting into trouble before he started coming to the center, heading down a path that David recognized all too well. "Mr. David, can I ask you something?" Ramon said, looking up from his textbook. "Of course. Why do you do this? Like you could be doing anything with your money. Why spend it on kids like us?" David thought about the question. "Because someone once told me that kindness matters even when no one is watching. And because I believe everyone deserves someone in their corner, someone who believes they can be more than their circumstances." Ramon nodded slowly. "Well, thanks. For believing in us, I mean. Moments like that made everything worthwhile." David saw kids who'd been written off by everyone else start to believe in themselves. He watched them graduate high school, get into college, find good jobs. The center became a hub for the community, a place where people looked out for each other. David still lived modestly. He'd bought a small house, nothing fancy, and invested the rest of Arthur's money wisely so the center would be sustainable for years to come. He dated occasionally but hadn't settled down yet. His life was full in a different way, surrounded by the kids at the center and the staff who'd become like family. On the 3rd anniversary of Arthur's death, David visited his grave. He brought flowers and sat on the grass beside the headstone. "I did it," David said quietly. The center is thriving. We've helped over 300 kids so far. Kelly graduated nursing school with honors and is working in pediatrics just like she wanted. I think you'd be proud of what we've built." A gentle breeze rustled the leaves overhead and David smiled. He thought about that November morning, about stopping to help an old man with a door. Such a small decision, just a few minutes out of his day, and it had changed everything. He'd learned something important from Arthur. Life isn't measured in dollars or achievements. It's measured in connections, in the moments when you choose to see another person and treat them with dignity. It's measured in the lives you touch and the kindness you put into the world. David stood up, brushed off his pants, and headed back to his car. He had a meeting at the center with a group of volunteers who wanted to start a new mentorship program. There was always more work to do, more kids who needed help, more kindness to spread. As he drove through the city past the mall where he used to work, past Arthur's old house that now belonged to a young family, David thought about how one act of kindness had created ripples that kept spreading outward. Arthur had given him money, yes, but more importantly, he'd given him purpose and a reminder that every person matters, that everyone deserves to be seen. And now, every single day, David tried to pass that lesson forward. He tried to be for these kids what Arthur had been for him, someone who believed in them, someone who saw their potential, someone who proved that kindness wasn't just a nice idea but a force that could actually change lives. The guard who'd helped an old man had become something more, not because of the money, but because he'd learned that the greatest inheritance isn't what you receive, it's what you choose to do with it. And David had chosen to honor Arthur's memory by building something that would outlast them both, something that would keep spreading kindness long after they were gone. That was Arthur's real gift, and David would spend the rest of his life making sure it was never forgotten.